The people, the headlines, the issues impacting you and your family this week in Cincinnati on 9 on Your Side.
Good morning and welcome to This Week in Cincinnati. Today we're speaking with U.S. Senate candidate, Republican Congressman Jim Renacci. Renacci originally filed to run for Ohio governor, but when Ohio Treasurer Josh Mandel dropped out because of his wife's health, Renacci jumped right into the Senate race. Renacci represents Ohio's 16th congressional district, which runs from western Cleveland to South Worcester. He has represented that area since January of 2011, by the way, so he has won, of course, several re-election campaigns. His major opponents in the Republican primary are businessmen Mike Gibbons and Melissa Atkinson, with months ticking down toward the primary in May. The winner of the May primary will face Democratic incumbent Sherrod Brown. He is running for a third term in the Senate. Joining us right now to talk a little bit about the campaign and the many issues going on right now in Washington is Congressman Jim Renacci. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Side note here, we are taping this on Monday, February 12th, so we could try to fit around your schedule. Obviously, you're very busy with events in D.C., and of course, you're out on the campaign trail. What was the main factor, aside from Josh Mandel stepping out, what was the main reason you decided to not try to become Ohio's next governor, instead to fill this Senate seat?
Sure. Well, look, it came down to a call from the White House. I was actually campaigning for governor when Josh Mandel stepped down, and we heard about his wife and the illness. I was asked multiple times to get into this race. I said no. We were moving along in the governor's race, and we're happy with where we're at. But about 4 or 5 days after that, I got a call from the White House, spoke with the president's staff and the president, and they really wanted me to jump into this race because of the concerns of getting another person who can help with President Trump's agenda. And I've been a supporter of President Trump all the way back to the Ohio primary, and he's been a big supporter of mine, so he really wanted me in this race.
There's a big difference between being a governor of a state and a senator. What do you think you're going to miss out on by not running for governor? What would you have liked to have achieved, perhaps, that you won't be able to achieve now?
Well, let's face it, as a governor, you're executive, you're moving Ohio forward as an executive. As a senator, you're still moving Ohio forward, but you're moving it forward under the Senate side and trying to move the president's agenda forward. So, you know, in both ways, I'm going to work always to make sure Ohio's first. I'm going to work as hard as I can to make sure we're moving Ohio in the right direction, which today, as I said when I ran for the governor's race, it's not going in the right direction. You
received Senator Portman's endorsement. Josh Mandel said that he was convinced to endorse you by a phone call. What happened in that phone call to bring his endorsement on?
Well, I called Josh. I'm not sure if it was my phone call or another phone call, but I just called Josh and asked him. I said, I need you, to step up. I mean, look, he has a tragedy in his family with his wife and the situation with her illness. He was trying to stay out of politics, and I asked him if he would, I really need him to be able to reassure the people that he has now spent over 4 years with, saying, yes, this is a guy that I want to step up.
It's very clear, obviously, the Trump administration, the president himself endorses you. You rode Air Force One during last week's visit. You toured the plant up in Blue Ash. You were kind of right there alongside, obviously, Senator Portman as well, during this visit. You're apparently, obviously, the Trump administration's choice. What was that day like to, I guess, to have him put you under his wing, so to speak?
Yeah. So I've been with the president, as I said, since the primary here in Ohio. What was great, though, and I've been with him a number of times in the White House, he's always been very supportive of me, was supportive of me as a businessman, which most of my life I was a businessman. I'm almost 3 decades in business. So he and I got along from that standpoint. I've also been someone who believes our biggest problems are continuing to hire career politicians over and over again, and he also believes that. So that day, we had an opportunity to discuss just this race. The times I've been with him in the past, we were talking about the governor's race, we were talking about agenda items, we were talking about a lot of things. But it was good to be able to spend some time with him in Air Force One, but also along the ride in the car and also at the factory.
You mentioned, there's a quote where you say that you had a distaste for Washington, a strong distaste for Washington. And then you just mentioned a second ago about not bringing in career politicians. Some would look at your jump from the governor's race for Ohio to jumping into the Senate race after your years in Congress, that you're a career politician. You're the exact thing that you're saying doesn't work in Washington and needs not to be there.
Well, I'm clearly not a career politician when I spent almost 3 decades in business. The only reason I went to Washington is because my car dealership was taken away from me when Washington, the federal government, took over General Motors, made General Motors file bankruptcy, and then my dealership was taken away from me. That was what I call one of the most tragic times in a businessman's career, when you can see the federal government coming in and taking something from you. So that's the reason I went to Washington. Now that I've been there, it is broken. We have a system where we're spending way too much money. We're going to pass this on to our children and grandchildren. What I finally realized was I could probably do more coming back to the state of Ohio in the House seat. But I also realize now I can do more for the country in the Senate seat, especially with the president not only wanting to help me, but me wanting to help him get his agenda accomplished.
One thing you had posted on your Facebook page, and I can read it in part, was from last week. You were talking about the vote, the 600 pages of legislative text, and the 4 a.m. and the ramblings around the budget. You said, I fully support funding our military and voted for that funding just 2 days ago. However, this bill does not represent a path to fiscal sustainability. You talk about not wanting to spend a lot of money. And in fact, today, if we can go to the full screen, see if we can bring it up in regards to the budget today. And we're recording this again on February 12th on Monday. The White House had released the President Trump's proposed budget just a few hours ago. Here are some of the first headlines, if we can bring those up from that plan. It totals $4.4 trillion for the next fiscal year, and it projects a deficit of $984 billion in 2019 and more than $7 trillion in deficits over 10 years. Also includes plans to spend more on infrastructure. So you are a man who doesn't believe in spending the way Washington, D.C. is spending. So as somebody who's voted about 95% of the time in favor of what the Trump administration wants, how can you make any difference when it comes to the spending and the deficit for our country?
Well, the one thing I can continue to do is speak on behalf of that. I voted last week against the budget bill, which spent more money than, it was another spending bill I was uncomfortable with. And I know the president was supportive of that. It was born in the Senate, though. That was a deal that was born out of the Senate. I want to go to the Senate and keep talking about how we can't keep spending this kind of money. One of the things I've done in the last couple of years, I've tried to get a balance sheet on the federal government. I'm trying to get that published for the American people. The other thing that's very important is I tried to get a bill, and I'm still going to continue to do this, now do it in the Senate, where I bring the Comptroller General in front of the House and Senate. He's the CFO of the federal government. He's a Democrat, was appointed by President Obama in 2010. He would also tell you we're on an unsustainable path, like I did. He found me because he said, Congressman, I know you continue to say we're on an unsustainable path. I agree with you. And I'm trying to work with him to make sure people realize we just can't keep spending money we don't have.
Senator Rand Paul even stood up there and held back on a vote for a while on the floor. There's several Republicans and Democrats alike who realize and make those same statements that we can't keep spending like this, but yet we keep spending like this.
Well, the one thing I can tell you as a senator, I'm going to continue to say we can't keep spending like this. I'm not sure I'm going to sit there and talk for 12 hours or 14 hours like Senator Paul did. Sometimes I think these annex aren't necessary, but you just got to be able to let people know we can't continue down this path. Look, I have children. I don't have grandchildren yet. I fear for them. God help our children and grandchildren. We have to start realizing we can't spend this money we don't have.
All right, our discussion with Congressman Renacci will continue in just a moment. As a side note here, we have also invited Congressman Renacci's major opponents in the primary, Mike Gibbons and Melissa Atkinson, to join us here for This Week in Cincinnati, along with Senator Sherrod Brown as well. We're going to continue our conversation with the Congressman right after this break.
The people, the headlines, the issues impacting you, all on This Week in Cincinnati on 9 on Your Side.